megabytes or 1 megabyte, as they say, but I think 2 is much better. So that is where sometimes you have a bit of distortion and delay in the voice when you do the sessions. That's absolutely okay. Now, if you recall, just do a quick recap in terms of the 2 learning outcomes that we have done so far in this particular unit 4, which is academic and professional development. What we've looked at in these units is that you'll see that we discussed basically. We started off this unit, let's put it this way, to understand how do you manage learning when you're working within this sector, hospitality and tourism in particular. And then we did some basic audits to find out different learning styles. What is your learning style? And I've given you a few templates for you to complete, which will actually become a part of your assessment for learning outcome 1. And in the second one, because you're doing this course, it makes perfect sense for you to also have something called a SWOT analysis, so you know exactly what skills and attributes you require to work, and obviously find a long-term, make a long-term career in this sector. So it is a good idea to do a SWOT analysis of how you look at your strengths, weaknesses, and then using the audit that you've done, which is the skills audit, maybe your learning style, the SWOT template that you've prepared. What you are required to do then is to basically prepare something called a personal development plan or a career professional development plan, because if you're doing it at your end, wherein you prepare this, but it is not going to be reviewed by your supervisor, then normally you will find the document being termed as something called the personal development plan, because you make it, it's a working document, you review it from time to time, keep updating it, and see if you're meeting the targets that you're setting using the SMART target methodology, wherein you're setting targets which are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and also time-bound. If this personal development plan is essentially then reviewed or is basically appraised, by your supervisor, or if you're working in a place and an organization or a business, and you're asked to maintain and update this on a yearly basis, and you have your appraisals. Sometimes this is also then referred to as predominantly from the working point of view as a continuous professional development plan, or a CPD. And the idea there is the employer that you're working with or the organization that you're working with, they want to make sure that the skills that you have are up to date and you're able to perform at the best of your ability when you're given a task or you're given a responsibility. So whichever way we look at it, the first 2 learning outcomes basically go through that process of conducting an audit, finding out your learning style, how do you manage your learning, do a SWOT analysis, do a skills audit, and then what it is asking you to do is culminate all the findings that you've got into some sort of a working document, which is called the professional PDP or professional development plan. And that plan would help you, to understand some of the things that you've done with regards to, the activities carried out to find out your strengths, weaknesses, your skills, your attributes, and, what are the areas that you need to improve on. Now, from there, essentially, if you, before we move on to learning outcome 3, so my suggestion to you would be to basically complete those templates that I've sent across. And then in one of the tasks, you have to write a bit of a reflective statement, which is about, say, 100 words to reflect on why you think your learning style is, a particular type. And that, once it is done, then we move on to relating the unit, which is professional development predominantly, to the tourism and hospitality sector. And that is where we land up with something called learning outcome 3, wherein we are going to today look at a few slides and a handout which will basically help us understand how this information is important to employers when they employ people within this particular sector, or when you work within some of the various jobs within this sector. So I'm going to start off by looking at a bit of an overview, which is to give you some background in terms of how does this sector, which is THM as we call it, tourism and hospitality management, classify different employment types. What are the different opportunities and the types of employments that you can get? We'll then dwell from there on to understanding that what are the typical characteristics or attributes which employers look when they are looking at employing people within a particular job role within this sector. And in the last, what we will look at is we will broadly understand the skills and the qualifications which are required, which potential employers look at when you go for job interviews or when you're offered a job while working within this sector. Is that okay? So let's start off with a few slides just to give you a kind of background. So what we look at is when we look at this particular sector, in the UK, as you know, there are bodies which are called the sector skill councils, or bodies which are very closely aligned to Ofqual, and what they do is they bring out reports on the basis of which the qualification and its specifications are updated every 5 years. So the sector skills council body, which produces an insight into the tourism and hospitality sector, is the first slide, which it talks about. Their aim is to look at when any awarding organization or any qualification that you study, how it's put together. It's put together from an aspect of understanding what employers are looking for, what learners or professionals who are going to be taking up that employment, get from that. And last but not the least, how does the sector in general create job opportunities, employment, growth, GDP, contribute towards the GDP of the country is what they look at. So these are think tanks essentially, which look into some sort of a crystal ball, and peep into it to see where this sector is going, where are the jobs going, where the technology is evolving, certain factors like technology, infrastructure, development happening within the economy is actually driving this further. And their idea is to look at those key parameters or the key influences and bring that into the report. And that report helps then to rewrite, upgrade, update the content of the qualification, which is what learners study and professional bodies actually accredit, and then the centers like us actually deliver. Because let's face it, all these qualifications should lead to employment, and the aim and objective of developing any particular qualification by an academic body, in this case the sector skills, their idea is to basically predict what is going to happen in the sector by highlighting things which are going to be useful or critical for this sector to create jobs and help grow the economy in the future. So the first slide that you look at is primarily talking about what are the challenges the tourism sector faces, what is important in this sector nowadays in terms of today's growth pattern or the activities which are happening. How is it going to be shaped? Some of these developments which are happening in the sector, how they will shape up the future, what kind of challenges it poses, when I say challenges, in terms of productivity, because if you look at last year's budget or last year's budget here in the UK, the Chancellor actually looked at that, that obviously UK has record low numbers of unemployment now. It's at, I think, 4.4%. So there are only 1.2 million people who are out of work. And last, I think day before yesterday, the figures came out, there was a further fall in that number by about 14,000. So that means that at some stage, if the economy is able to support this many jobs across all sectors, at some stage, the Chancellor then starts to talk about things like productivity, efficiency, which is looking at how the same person employed within the job is able to produce more output, which helps the company produce more output, in general helps the sector produce more output, and in general, all these sectors then contribute to higher GDP or gross domestic product for the economy. So some of these broad issues and challenges are what are covered in the skills, sector skills insight. And they then marry some of them with, what the employers are looking at, what kind of engagement which the employers would do in terms of recruitment, selection, when they look at, laying off staff or making them redundant, what kind of skills need to be developed in order for individuals to make a career or, get a job within this sector. And all that is compiled in this particular report, which comes out. Now, to give you an example, if you look at these blocks that you see on the screen, an example to illustrate that would be when you look at how tourism as a sector has grown in the last 2-3 decades. So you see there were a lot of travel agents in the 90s and in the early 2000s. But as internet and technology and the comparison websites started to get a hold in the market, you've seen that the role of travel agents or tour operators, as we call them, has more or less disappeared from the market. They were, if you had to book a holiday, if you had to go on a vacation, you had to get in touch with a tour operator or a travel agent to get your tickets booked and things like that. But because technology has had so much of a influence on this particular sector in terms of systems, processes, what has happened is that it has led to a decline or maybe a complete wipeout of this particular middle agent or a middle part of the supply chain, wherein tour operators and obviously if you look at travel agents have more or less totally disappeared. So this, if the sector skills insight report does not predict, these are some of the things that they look at. So they look into the future, 10 years ahead, 5 years ahead, and they look at how the sector is going to be shaping up, what kind of employment opportunities will come out, what kind of skills will the employees need, what kind of job versus requirements of skills will be there with the employers, is what is actually going to come out in this particular report. So this report is published every year. Different think tanks and different bodies publish it, but a more structured form of this report comes out about once in 5 years, and that is where their idea is to predict how the skills and the requirement of employability within the sector is going to be looked at. If I look at a bit more elaboration into when I say what does the travel and tourism sector consists of, so we think of things like hotels or bed and breakfast, B&Bs. We talk about restaurant and bars. We talk about travel agencies and tour operators, which I've just mentioned. You look at people taking out vacation or doing activities which are primarily related to recreation. Say for example rejuvenation, religion, for example, which could also lead to travel activities. And then people do travel when you look at certain destinations like Amsterdam, Las Vegas, you look at Monaco, you look at Macau in the Far East. These are destinations which have become synonymous with gambling, betting, and people just going out generally to have a good time. Now, when we look at this particular sector, there are lots of other main and ancillary activities which are happening in this particular sector, but I've just captured a few on the slide. But when we looking at hotels, there are different types of hotels. There are 5-star, there are 7-star, there are bed and breakfast. There is something called Airbnb. That means which is a concept wherein you can rent out an accommodation when you're going on a holiday. You have rent share apartment kind of concept. So there are different types. But hotels in general is a sector. When you look at recreation in general is a sector, whether that recreation is for holiday, vacation, religion, exercise, meeting, conferences, any other thing, that is all part of recreation. When we look at entertainment includes lots of different types of events, like you do a football World Cup, you travel to Olympics, for example. You're traveling because of an event or entertainment which is happening because it's related to this sector. So when we look at all these, what we try and see is that in the UK in particular, 1/5 of the workforce which is currently employed working within tourism is actually working within these sectors. So the biggest employer in terms of when I look at tourism within the UK, you will see that these 5 or 6 are the core areas wherein most of the 1.5-2 million people are actually employed directly within these activities. So when we understand where the Sector Skills Council basically produces a report which provides insight, we need to marry that with what are the various activities or arms of, let's put it this way, activities which can provide employment within the tourism sector. And when we look at that, what we do get to see, these are the basic set of activities under which most people get employed. Now, if I give you some more data about what are the skills challenges which the UK sector in particular is facing, what we are seeing is that this sector obviously worldwide is growing. There's a lot of growth happening. This is the largest employer across the globe as far as people are concerned, labor workforce is concerned. So this sector, in terms of if you have to look at some sort of an annual turnover or a GDP, is worth $1.6 trillion. So this sector, the gross output in terms of sum of people employed, sum total of all the people employed and their earnings within the sector is the highest in terms of any other employability which this sector actually provides and generates worldwide or globally. This sector is growing quite robustly. So even after Brexit, there are reports which are coming out that there will be a short period of decline, but after that tourism will still pick up, and what it says is the output is generally going to be increasing, or has been increasing in the last decade or so every year by about 5%. Now, when you look at one of the key requirements in this sector is customer service, right? When we look at doing any activity, if I just go back to the slide, if you stay at a hotel, if you had a good experience, you would want to go back and stay at that hotel, or maybe a chain of that hotel when you're visiting a different location or a country. If you had a good service in a particular restaurant or a bar, you'll want to frequent that again. So one of the key things that this sector actually thrives on is the fact that the quality and this level of service which is required, is something which drives the customer to come back and have a repeat service, or try out that particular service again, because the experience has been quite good. The other point which we need to look at is, because this sector is always striving to provide better levels of service, whether it's in terms of customer service. You look at a hotel may provide, under the umbrella of customer service, a number of different services. So sometimes people take short breaks, go to city hotels, but they go in to do gym and sauna, or some sort of leisure activities. Sometimes you will see you have an event which is happening in the hotel, you're attending a conference or a meeting, but all these customers going in for different activities are actually expecting a certain level of service to which they have signed for, or the reason why they've chosen this particular location to host the event or conduct the activity. So here, one of the key things which the Skills Insight report also predicts is that over the years there is a lot of requirement of training which is coming up within the sector, primarily to provide or improve the levels of service. So the customer's level of service is the key driver when we look at one of the things which poses challenges as far as the requirement of skills and attributes are concerned when employers look for employing people within the sector. The other thing that you look at is sometimes, and this is something which is quite synonymous with this services sector, whether it's financial services, retailing, travel or tourism and hospitality, you will see that here the workforce which works is quite skilled, but they're also skilled in multitasking. They're also skilled in the fact that they're able to, because of the continuous learning which happens on the job, they're able to do a lot of different type of functions, or take up different types of roles within this particular employability, or when they're working. So here, most employers would try and look at retaining the staff which they have trained over the years, because that staff would have then picked up the basics and the ethics of how the organization works, and then are able to provide or deliver, in some cases, let me put it this way, tailor the type of service they provide to meet the requirements of the customer. So one of the other things that you look at in this sector, which is a key requirement, is the staff who's, could be highly trained, staff which is able to multitask, staff which is more productive or efficient, and people or staff which is, in some cases, because you see it is a 24/7 operation. So in some cases, it is also related and referred to that this particular sector employs a lot of people, but sometimes the employment does happen on unsociable hours. That means I might get a rota or some sort of a schedule which will ask me to work the day shifts for a few weeks, and then I'll be doing night shifts for a few weeks or months, and then I'll go back to a afternoon shift, because the operation is 24/7. So this is one of the key requirements, that when you look at doing a job interview in this sector, they would say, are you flexible to do a day shift or a night shift? Are you flexible to adapting to a schedule or a rota? And that is where this is also going to pose one of the challenges. pose one of the main challenge primarily for HR managers when they are recruiting people within this sector. Last but not the least, there is a lot of churn in this sector, which is also a bit of a problem or an issue, problematic issue for employers within this sector. So what you see is that because the nature of the jobs are quite monotonous, that means you do the same job again and again, say every day, and some of these jobs are high intensity jobs wherein you cannot let the service slip or the levels of service slip. That is where you see that a lot of employees who work within the sector end up leaving it, after a few years of work or after putting in few years within the sector, and that leads to a large amount of staff turnover. Now, official figures which are available is that this particular sector, specifically when we go back to restaurants, bars, nightclubs, and entertainment joints, you see that there is a minimum churn or a high staff turnover of up to as high as about 31% within this particular aspect of hospitality, because most restaurants, as they were open between anywhere between lunchtime 3 p.m. onwards till midnight, or even after the midnight hours. So it is expected that staff who works within the sector is able to then work unsociable hours, and also sometimes it's difficult to keep and cope with this particular requirement. You see people when they're quite young, when they are enthusiastic, passionate about working within this sector, they want to travel the world, or for example, in this case, looking at various ways in which how people make their mind up in terms of taking up an opportunity in this sector. They normally start quite young, but at a later stage or a phase in their life, they normally tend to do away and then leave this job and go into a more settled, services-oriented desk-based job after gaining some of the skills and attributes and experience from this sector. Now, when we look at how employability in general is within the sector in the UK, this is a bit of a snapshot on this slide, which says the figures are slightly old, but in 2006, I would say, when we look at now 2019, in 2016, the new report which has come out, from ATHE, basically says that this sector output is about $71 billion as far as travel and tourism is concerned. It's about 6% of total GDP of the UK. So this is to give you a scale and size of how big this sector is in the UK. Its contribution to the overall GDP. UK's GDP is about 2.25 trillion pounds, and if you look at 1 billion is 100 million. So this sector is substantial in terms of its contribution to the GDP. It's about 6% of the national output as far as employability, and the output in terms of productivity is concerned. It employs about 2.5 million people. So 1 in 12 jobs in the UK are actually within the tourism and hospitality sector. You see 1/3 of workers are under the age of 25, compared to the average across other sectors. This is higher by about 13%. So as I mentioned to you earlier in the previous slide, you will see that more young people go and work within the sector, and that is a reflective of the the report which is brought out, so which says that 1/3 of the workforce within the sector is under the age of 25. Now, in this sector, the output is increasing quite healthily in terms of the percentage growth year on year. So it's growing by about 6%, and unemployment or employability figure, in terms of contributions to the overall national employability index, this increases by about 0.6 to 1% every year, and has been increasing for the last 10 years. That means if 100 jobs are created, in this particular sector, about 1% of those jobs are actually created within the tourism and hospitality sector in the UK. Now, this sector is predominantly made up of small and micro operators, which I say, if you look at the number of hotel chains in the UK, there are about 60 odd. But when you look at the majority of the hotel chains or places for stay is managed by people running their own bed and breakfast. So that is what I meant. The proportion of operators or businesses working within the sector constitute in terms of being small and, micro operators. So the large chains, when you look at Holiday Inn, you look at Hilton, Crown Plaza, Marriott, they are international chains. Obviously, they have operations here, but the ownership of that might lie in a different country like the US or, maybe in France and things like that. But generally, you will see that the sector in the UK is operated by, people which are primarily in the, the micro and the small sector. Now, apart from this, what we also look at is that this sector, in the UK is a major player. So that means when government brings out policies, they bring out updates to the budget, or if there is any sort of policy-related guidelines which are published, this sector, is one of the key torchbearers as far as the economy and the, growth and output in the economy is concerned. This slide again also is from a report called Visit Britain, which was created just before the London Olympics in 2012, and it basically, created a bit of a snapshot to say how many people visit. It's a report which comes out every year, and I can, forward the latest copy of that report for 2018 as well. Now, this basically predicts that, what are the hotspots in terms of visits or, locations in the UK, how much revenue does it generate, how many visitors actually come in, how many people from within the UK go out on vacation. So it's like a bit of a snapshot report which predicts what kind of spending, what are the major events which are happening, and what is actually sprucing up the activity of tourism within the UK. So this slide, for now, just leave it. I would say just concentrate on the fact that I'll send a copy of the updated report, which is 2018, but the figures don't change drastically. We are looking at about 60 million people who take a lot of holidays internally, but there are about 31 million Brits which actually travel abroad every year during summer, Easter, Christmas holidays to take a vacation abroad. Some of the major attractions obviously haven't changed over the last decade, but most of it in terms of tourism activity comes into London, Edinburgh. These are 2 or 3 major locations through which we get most of the tourism. But when we look at people coming in and obviously the amount being spent or the money being generated, it creates about, as I mentioned to you earlier, a spending of between 15 to 20 billion pounds, which is amassed as, money which basically people spend when they are visiting Britain. So there are lots of attractions which have visitors in millions. For example, the Houses of Parliament, you look at the Big Ben, you look at the London Eye, you look at some of the other, architectural attractions like the Stonehenge, you look at Buckingham Palace. Some of these get, anywhere between 12 to 13 million visitors a year. Just to relate this to the fact that if I look at which is the most visited tourist attraction in the world, so the clear winner is Paris, which is Eiffel Tower, and there about 32 million visitors visit every year. As far as the statistics for a single highest visited tourist attraction is concerned. So in the UK, obviously most of them are centered around London because of obviously the heritage and the history in the past. Now, having understood a bit of a background into what is the tourism sector from a point of view of skills and employment in particular, what kind of skills and attributes employers look for, what are the main branches or heads of the particular sector within tourism and hospitality. We looked at some of the things which employers look for, and then a bit of a snapshot to understand where all does this industry stand within the UK in terms of its contribution. Now, why does tourism matter? If you look at the top 5 countries, which are destination countries, and I think the last time I looked at it and I Googled it, the most frequently visited country for tourism is now Spain. It has overtaken the US. So about 82 million visitors visit Spain every year. Second visited country in the world is US. The third most visited country is France. And UK is either the 4th or the 5th top destination for tourism in the world. So as it explains, there are lots of activities which the government and a lot of other bodies like the Visit Britain, the ATHE, and a lot of other associations actually create. Their aim is to grow this sector, get more visitors to visit Britain, and obviously generate more revenue for people who are employed within the sector and the businesses which work within the sector to create employments. So they have a calendar of events that they run throughout the year, and these calendar of events is a combination of sports events, combination of entertainment events, combination of political events, lots of different types of events which actually drives traffic to the UK. So if we have to look at, in general, if I give you an example and we go a bit tangent to, for a minute, come out of the tourism sector, you look at promoting anything that you want to do promotion for. For example, if you have a local shop or you have a local restaurant and they have to do promotions, they have to have a set of activities that they do every year, every month, every week, in order to get footfalls into that restaurant. So they could do leafleting, they could do some social media advertising, they could do reviews, they could do offers, they could have some sort of events which is driving visitors to the restaurant, like, for example, free lunches for kids, or during the weekdays you have, say, free coffee on the weekend if you're coming in as a couple. Do events around some of the major events like Easter, Valentine. All these activities are primarily done to increase customer footfalls into that restaurant. So similarly, the tourism industry has to also do its bit to increase the footfalls coming into Britain as far as tourism and tourism activities are concerned. So what we look at is this sector is quite important. There are a number of associations and key bodies which basically work together to drive traffic and customer numbers to the UK, because UK is one of the top 5 tourist destinations. It is a big contributor to the GDP of the country. It employs a lot of people in this particular sector, and last but not the least, it is creating livelihood for a lot of businesses and businesses in terms for people who are working within the sector. Now, secondly, let's look at some of the challenges which we discussed in slides. What are the key skill challenges? One of the key challenges that we look at is productivity challenge. Now, any sector that you look at, any particular sector in which we look at productivity. So when we say productivity, what we are looking at is trying to find out, what is the output which an individual actually produces when they work within this sector. So, for example, the average income at which they are employed, and that average income would be calculated on the basis of number of hours for which they are working, and those hours which they are working for contribute to how much of revenue generation for the business. And in general, that would be looking at an output coming in from an employee. A simple example to explain that: you employ somebody in the office, you fix a particular pay scale, you say, okay, I'm going to be paying this individual 20,000 pounds, and that person will be given a job description, say you're required to do this activity, or execute these responsibilities over the course of the weeks and months as you work within the company. Now, the functions and the activities or the roles and responsibilities which the person actually executes is going to be either supportive, administrative, operational, or driving sales or revenue into the company. Now, all that is tangible and can be calculated in terms of the output which the individual puts in, and the role that the individual is working on is going to put in to help drive that particular revenue. Simple example, within a company, if the target this year is to bring, say, for example, £1 million in terms of revenue, there are 5 sales managers, the target might be divided equally or might be divided on the basis of regions in which these sales managers are based. So the ones which are based closer to London, Southeast, would get, say, for example, higher target. The ones which are based up north or in Scotland or other areas like northwest and northeast of England might have little lower targets. But their contribution, so if I say 5 sales managers, London area, 250K, we look at northwest, 150K, look at northeast, 100K, look at Scotland, 100K, and then you go to Wales, 50K. So what we see is that there is a set definitive percentage that we can take out, which the person will be contributing depending on the market, the area, and the proportion which the proportionate contribution which the person will be able to make towards the business. So if I have to look at the productivity of the sales manager in Wales, because his annual target is only 50K, and if we divide that by 1 million, it's not difficult to find out that that person might be calculate, how much would he be looking at. So 50,000, if I divide that by 1 million, percentage-wise, that person is contributing 5% towards the turnover of the company. right? So when we look at productivity, in the sense, it is also directly related to what is the output or the contribution that you make towards increasing the performance, or linked, which is linked to the performance of the company. So here the main focus is the HR department looks at the productivity challenge, and they look at various tools. They use various tools and techniques, like how to motivate the employees to be able to achieve that target, what kind of training and development that they can put in, so that the levels of customer service, or the operational service which is required, is delivered by that individual. And last but not the least, if they meet that target, if they meet that levels of service, then what kind of rewards will the individual get, so that they are motivated enough to continue in that role, and then keep performing this on a year-on-year basis. And that is something that comes across from, by measuring the performance, but also putting in rewards and, performance rewards, or rewards and incentives in place, so that if you meet the target, you get this. If you don't meet the target, you don't get it. But if you meet and exceed the target, you not just get, say, a bonus, but you also get some additional incentive, because you've helped in reach that goal which the company has actually set. So here, the challenge is to look at pushing the employees to do, and achieve the target, but at the same time keeping them motivated by putting in rewards and incentives, and at the same time not, when they drive the growth and performance with the employees, they are making sure that they are looking at creating satisfied customers, or the levels of service which is required to be provided in this sector do not drop, and they are still able to, meet or exceed that level of service. Now, in order to explain the productivity challenge, let's look at a small case study which has been put across on the next few slides. Now here, the idea is, the challenge is the sector has tight margins. As you know, everything is costed within this sector. So for example, if you have an empty hotel room, the business is losing revenue. But if they have to sell that room and fill that capacity up, that might get them lower margins, but at least they are not going to be making loss. Because if you invest in creating a hotel, and that has, say, 1,000 rooms, and if the rooms are not occupied and they're vacant, that means you're losing money on the vacant capacity or the unutilized capacity within the hotel. So here, sometimes you will see, the hotels like Premier Inn, Travel Lodge, some of the others would put out, they have a sign outside where they normally say what is the daily rate of the room today. And depending on how the occupancy rate is going, the rate actually fluctuates even during the course of the day. I might call in the morning when a lot of checkouts are happening, and the rate I might get for a normal room or an executive room would be 45, 50 pounds. But during the course of the day, if I call after lunchtime and most of the check-ins have already happened after 12 p.m. or afternoon, what you get to see is the rate actually climbs further, goes to 70, 75 pounds. But if there are unutilized capacity in terms of the rooms not being utilized, then what you will see is in the evening, the hotel would drop the rate down to 35, 40 pounds just to cover those, to attract more numbers and to get those rooms occupied. So in this case, this is a call which the general manager of the hotel, or maybe there's a set policy which is there, and this kicks into action as soon as they have empty rooms, check-ins, check-outs, and they know what is the cost of keeping a room empty, and what is the minimum cost of breaking even to keep that room occupied and provide a level of service which you are expecting. So when you go into a room, you expect clean linen, you want the beds to be made up, you want a clean toilet, you want to make sure that the phone and some of the other facilities in the room that you're that you're going to stay there overnight or during the course of the day are available. So without having those compromises, they still have to look at what is the bare minimum cost which is required for that to be sold at, or the pricing to be set at, which allows them to still sell that room out, but at the same time do not compromise on the services which are required to be provided when that room is being rented out. You will see that with restaurants as well. Sometimes they work on tight margins, because when you look at the orderings or takeaways, for example, when you look at Pizza Hut, for example, which is sometimes you will see that some of these outlets or chains also open up very next to a hotel. And that could be because of the fact that some of these places are trying to provide alternate dining options to what the hotel might have in terms of a small coffee shop or a built-in restaurant, but sometimes customers would want to eat out, and you will find, some of the other restaurants and places in and around a particular hotel as well. So when you look at productivity, when you look at the concept of, break-even, efficiency, unutilized capacity, what we do get to see is that it is important for them to at least have a minimum number of rooms filled in order for the hotel to actually break even across the year, or in order for the staff to be able to, afford that affordability of the staff and its wages for that operation to be able to run. So this is a small case study wherein, we picked up conferences as a venue. So what we've said is the agency needs to find a venue, and here about 23 employees are looking at, attending this, particular training, and the training approach has been done in such a way that they want to see that a number of employees are able to attend, but at the same point in time, once they're able to attend the training, they get the benefits of that particular training and the training which has been delivered to increase productivity in terms of, when they look at going back to their jobs, obviously effectively able to perform their duties. Another slide here which basically talks about, the employee challenge. When you look at performance and how does, sometimes you have a very different approach, wherein what I look at is that, okay, I can understand what the job, objectives are. I can look at the job description, but what I want to do is find out what I'm going to gain from this job. Sometimes when you give a job interview, you understand what the job requirements are, but at the end of it, when you're selected in the interview, what you want to find out is what are the key things that you are going to be getting once you deliver that, or on a monthly basis, complete those objectives or tasks which are there in that job. So in terms of your salary, in terms of reward, bonus, incentives, other commensurate, let's put it this way, emoluments that you get, which is things like a dental plan, a holiday package, number of holidays across the year, things like that. So you as an individual is more interested in finding out how would your productivity, if you perform better, if you are able to perform better than other employees within this sector, how are you going to be differentiated from a point of view of getting more benefits or getting more incentives? So this is where the performance challenge is, that the HR has to manage the expectation of the employees in order for them to be keeping them engaged within the job, but also able to create a differentiation wherein if you perform well, you get this. If you're performing exceedingly well, you get this. But if you're being the best performer consistently on a week-on-week, month-on-month basis, on a year-on-year basis, these are the additional rewards or other things that you will get, which will keep you motivated and working within the organization. And some of these could be rewards, some of these could be financial incentives, some of these could be long-term incentives, which are also given out to at the senior level to the management when they talk about stock options, or when they give you stocks which you can divest in 3 years, 5 years, should you stay and continue with the organization. Again, what I've done is, in order to explain this point, I put in a bit of a case study here, which is for, a hotel chain, which is Do Win and Bistro. And here what we're looking at is how do they make sure that they have employees which are engaged within the business and are able to, contribute towards the overall objectivity or the goal and the mission of the organization. And this particular case study talks about that during the economic downturn, a lot of hotels were severely hit, and the sector was severely hit because people did not have money to spend or go out on holidays. So how did they try and then, re-engage with their staff to keep them happy and also have them deliver the same level of service even under reduced conditions of, under the reduced conditions of business. So what they did was they reduced the staff turnover. They tried to retain the maximum, the most productive staff within the organization. But at the same time, that staff helped, reduce expenses or create savings within the organization by providing an excellent service or to the customers which were actually staying at the hotel or utilizing their services, which brought the overall expenses down. And that is where the engagement with employees as a case study comes in. Now, so these are challenges that we are talking about individually. So we started off with something called productivity. We went across to engagement with employees, and there's a case study. Now, this one talks about turnover and retention. So how do employers within this sector retain employees? There are people which are going to come in and work and leave, That increases the cost of recruitment and selection every year for bars and restaurants, or places which lose or staff which actually end up leaving the organization every year. So when you look at that exponential cost, what we are looking at understanding is that the sector is continuously looking at reducing the staff turnover within this sector. And in order to reduce that staff turnover, what they are looking at is they are looking at bringing in ingenious ways to retain them by looking at doing training and development, by providing motivation through rewards and incentives. And last but not the least, they are making some of the roles within this particular sector more flexible. So that means if, one of the prerequisites, if I look at 10 years back, if somebody wanted to work in this sector, it was more or less one of the key things on the job application form, that are you flexible? Are you okay to work flexible hours? Now today, because this sector has expanded tremendously and people also have a lot of choice in terms of employability options within the sector, sometimes you will see this question from the job application form has actually disappeared or has become optional. So they ask you, can you work flexible hours, rather than say as a mandatory requirement? And this is where, again, it is to do with the fact that the sector has become flexible, wherein what they've tried to do is sometimes the unsociable offers or hours essentially are offered to people within the sector which are male employees rather than female employees. And that is where it has brought in, the staff turnover or the, overall redundancy rate or churn in this particular sector, down slightly. When we look at, it was 23% in 2011, and it's gone down from 31% in 2009. Today, the staff turnover in this sector is about 21%. And that is still a very high rate, but obviously the sector and the bodies which work within this to create employability are continuously working at reducing this churn, which is being done through various initiatives in order to retain employees within the organization. Again, what I put one slide in primarily to look at a small bit of a case study wherein how, the Red Carnation hotels basically looked at reducing their labor turnover, because this was, this basically as an exercise helped them save £500,000, over a period of 5 to 8 years, wherein the staff were able to retain the staff, give them different responsibilities, move them within different job functions, but did not allow them to leave, or did work with their employees in terms of finding out which other sectors, which other skills, attributes, and the areas they want to work in. And then by job rotation, by looking at listening to, the employees and doing training and development, they were able to reduce the staff turnover, which actually helped in saving, £500,000 of recruitment costs for the group in the last, 5 to 8 years. One of the other challenges that we look at is how do employers invest in developing skills for the workforce within this sector. Now, this sector, as per research, has the highest training expenditure per employee. So if you're even fresh from this qualification and you want to start a job within a hotel, what will happen is, if they give you a job, you will still, by the time you start actually doing and, executing the day-to-day responsibilities, you would have gone through a certain pattern of trainings and induction in terms of, becoming comfortable with the role before they are able to allow you to carry that role, independently. So, for example, when you sometimes look at staff which work within bars and restaurants, or, work within conferences and meetings, they need to undergo a lot of training in terms of personal etiquettes, mannerism, how to look at, display of, cutlery and other things. And these are all trainings which that, staff has to go through even before they are deployed onto the job from day one. So there is a pre-expenditure cost, which when I say pre-training costs, or a lot of a pre-cost, let me put it this way, cost which the employer has to incur even before the employee actually starts to work in that role. this cost is the highest as far as this sector is concerned. Across sectors, this is the highest cost. So an average which the research predicts is about £3,635. Now imagine this, and if you have to, like a simple example, if you employ somebody in the center, you have to spend a day or two in terms of training. Now, if you know that the person is working at, say, £150 a day or £200 a day, the employer is actually spending 2 days, which is £400 as training and development costs, even before the employees actually started to work in the particular role for which they've been hired. And this is a cost which is an expenditure to the business, because they have to invest into making sure that you understand the company vision, mission, you are inducted fully, and you understand what your role will require, and the things that you're going to try and work with, the teams that you will work with, what kind of expectation is there, and all this has to be laid out in some sort of an induction program with the employee even before they start their job. So the first week or first 2 or 3 days, depending on the size of the business and the job responsibility you have, you are given certain time to be able to become accustomed to what you are going to be expected to do in that role. And that is a cost which has to be invested in terms of just to get you started. But after that, when you look at, there's a lot of investment which happens within this field because of the service aspect of it, wherein the staff needs to be continuously trained in terms of, improving their customer service skills, and also to look at, development of ongoing skills which are required for them to be able to perform that role well. So if you work within the front office, you are expected to understand that you have knowledge, working knowledge of how to use, a particular system for booking. You might want to be able to use the system of receiving telephone and then transferring telephones if you're at the front desk. And last but not the least, you have to be trained on, lots of other things, but just one of the other points is you need to be trained on understanding how to accept card payments, payments to other routes, and process them and do the invoicing which is required when you're checking in and checking out guests. So when you look at all that, along with a number of other responsibilities, would be a part and parcel of people working in the front desk. But before you're put into the front desk, you are put through a training of a month or so that you're able to observe some of the experienced staff handling those queries, working with this guests, and carrying out that responsibilities, which is further investment which they are putting in terms of some sort of a on-job training in order for you to develop the right skills to be able to service the customer when you are given the opportunity, or when you're allowed to, or when you're asked to work independently. So those are things which you also look at when we look at the performance challenge, when we look at one of the key challenges which the HR and the sector faces within this is to look at how to keep continuously developing workforce in terms of the skills required to work within the sector. And this is an example of some of the occupational distribution of shortages within the tourism and other sectors. So tourism, if you look at, there's a requirement of a lot of training for elementary staff. People who are asked to do, waitering, for example, might be asked to do or take up temporary job roles. There is a lot of difference. As you see, other sectors is 7%, but in terms of staff which works within the sector, the skill shortage is a staggering 36%. When you look at administrative staff, this sector copes quite well. It's only 3%, but when you look at all the other sectors, it's about 7%. So here, the focus on quality and the level of service which is required to be provided while delivering a particular, doing a particular job requires a lot of investment in terms of training and development at the employer's end. So again, I've put together a small case study, which is to say how a lot of firms are actually taking up apprenticeships within this sector to train, employees or staff so that they are able to, work within this sector. And while they do carry out this training, they're able to develop the staff which understand, the requirements of a particular job role, while do the training and also getting paid at the same time. And that is something which is supported by the government in the UK through the apprenticeship program. An example here that I would say is, if I work in Marriott Hotel, is going to be different from if I work in Hilton Hotel, because the ethos in which and the type of customers they serve, the ethos, the vision, mission of the hotel change might be different from the one that I have previously worked in, but it'll help me, transfer some of my skills, knowledge, as I say, transferable skills, which I've gained by working in a particular, job role in a hotel, would be helpful for me to transition to a new role. But still, after that, I will still need to pick up a lot of new things, because that would not directly translate into what this organization and the way they are set up and the ethos of that organization is. So sometimes you see within the sector, it is very important for them to pick up employees or staff and work them through an apprenticeship program, which allows them to train them. It's like a blank canvas, but it allows the company to train them, in a way they want, so that they understand exactly what is expected of them when they look at training them to, start doing the role independently. Last but not the least, we're looking at, some of the key things, which is how is this sector growing and what is required, in this sector to secure the, success for the future. Now, the government invests into a lot of pilots in terms of pilot schemes or programs, which it does in order to bring in investment into this sector from either outside or, even investment which is happening from within the government. One of the current things that the government is looking at doing is that in terms of investment, they are looking at the employer ownership pilot schemes, which offers employees in England a direct access to, certain amount of investment if they are going to be, coming up and, branching into this particular sector to set up businesses and things like that. There is something called the Growth and Innovation Fund, which every year the government invests into it. And if there are new projects or international projects which are coming in to basically grow this sector, they do a bit of contribution in terms of either tax rebates or direct investment from the government to be able to help train employees, or you look at payment of apprenticeships, things like that is done through this particular route. Example that I would give today is that the government is looking at training a lot of young people through the apprenticeship route. And the way they've offered incentives to employers across all sectors is that an employer which is classified as a small medium enterprise or a large enterprise which has a turnover of over 3.2 million pounds annually will need to invest up to 5% in training their staff. So this is a 5% cess which they have to pay as a bit of a tax, and they have to then take on apprenticeships or people who are looking to get into the sector to be able to train them as apprentice and offer them job employabilities. And this is funded through 5% by the company, which is in terms of their turnover or the cess, and the balance piece or the cost of the course in terms of training, apprenticeship, and all that is basically paid for by the government. Now, this was 10% last year, but has been reduced to 5% because there was not much traction. A lot of employees did not feel, if you look at the likes of Sainsbury's and big retailers like Asda, Thompson, you look at Vodafone, some of these big companies which have turnover in billions of pounds. For them to invest 10% of that into training and development and help develop and train new workforce for skills, and then give them employment opportunities was a lot of money. So this year the government has reduced it to 5%, and their target is to help bring 2 million people into employment at the very young, at the younger spectrum of the labor force or the skilled labor force, and help them develop skills so that they can then start to work as apprenticeships for a year, and after that they are able to get access to opportunities of jobs within that company. Now, what are the benefits to businesses when government creates these kind of incentives or takes these initiatives? The incentive for business or benefits for businesses that they are, in order to make savings in terms of tax or other type of things, they are taking on more staff, which creates more employment opportunities within this sector. Sometimes you will see that by allowing the business and the public-private partnership to work in such a way, the government allows businesses to create public-private partnerships, which allows the businesses or private side of businesses, to employ staff when the cost of their wages or salaries is subsidized by the government. So they get access to cheap labor, but at the same time, they're training staff which will get into, or training the workforce which will get into some sort of employment and increase overall productivity and GDP for the country. So here it's a win-win situation, and the government looks at some of these initiatives primarily to look at creating a boost in terms of creating opportunities for employment, productivity overall for the business and the sector, but also for the economy when they see a rise in the GDP happening because of more employment and opportunities created by taking on such incentives. So if I have to look at summarizing in terms of what are the key messages that we look at for learning outcome 3, I think some of the key messages that we look at, if we have to recap, one is that this is a big sector as far as UK economy is concerned, because UK is the 5th largest or the most frequented destination in terms of travel and tourism in the world. The sector itself contributes significantly in terms of output to the economy, so it creates a lot of job opportunities, employment of up to 2.5 million people. 1 in 12 people in the UK are employed within the sector. This also helps increase overall gross domestic product or productivity across the economy by looking at dealing with some of the key challenges, things like low productivity, increasing employee engagement, looking at reducing turnover of employees, and also asking the public-private partnership to create opportunities by investing into the workforce to develop skills and bring more people into employment. And last but not the least, what they look at is that this sector, because it is growing annually at about between 5 to 6%, this sector then commands a significant amount of, let's put it this way, investment and time and effort from the government to be able to keep generating employment and other opportunities, as far as the population is concerned in the UK. So people see this as a serious career. People see this as a sector which provides lifelong opportunities for jobs, and this sector is seen as a sector which is seen to help develop skills specifically on the customer service side, on the quality level side, which staff are able to use in other location, in other opportunities at a later stage when they leave this sector and get employed in other places. So they get to see skills which are developed by working within the sector, which become transferable, and that also in general help the other sectors with regards to making the staff more productive when at some stage in their life they leave the travel and tourism sector and start working in the other side of services sector within the economy. Is that okay? So just give me 1 second. So is that okay, Selina? Mm-hmm. That's absolutely fine. So a copy of this presentation, is available on Moodle. And what I've also done is I've uploaded the Learning Outcome 4 as well, just in case you want to study, a bit further before we do the next session. So I've uploaded, Learning Outcome 4 here as well. And what we're also going to do is, when we finish Learning Outcome 4, we'll do a quick recap on, the assignment submission for this unit, so that we'll discuss the assignment brief also, and look at some of the evidence which is going to come from Learning Outcome 1 and 2, and the Learning Outcome 3 or 4 are primarily going to be, 3 is basically a theoretical aspect of it, and fourth Learning Outcome, which is just one task, is asking you to look at producing, an academic work which, looks at basically the report that you're going to put forward, as far as this assignment is concerned. So it will focus on some of the aspects of things like time management, writing a CV, looking at certain personal attributes, and general preparation that you do towards interview as a process is going to be what is going to be covered in Learning Outcome 4. Is that okay? So my suggestion to you would be, if you go through, I would suggest the Learning Outcome 4. The reason I put that down here, beforehand on Moodle is primarily to make sure that you can actually go through this presentation, because I think some of the things that you're going to see in that presentation slide are going to be quite self-explanatory. Things like what are the different types of communication which is used, within the tourism and hospitality sector. What is the importance of internal communication, external communication? So this is a bit of a general aspect. And then towards the end, why do you see sometimes the information is presented graphically? So when you look at a checkout bill, you look at the invoice, you look at, your expenses, you see a lot of information in this sector being presented graphically, because picture is worth 1,000 words. So when you look at advertisements, so the other form of communication which, the industry in general does, will be in the form of written and, visual communication. And that is what has been very briefly covered, in this particular learning outcome. So it's not going to be a bit of a rocket science, as far as just going through the slides of learning outcome 4 are concerned. But once you've done that, what we need to be able to do is just do a bit of a recap on the assignment of how you will submit and what kind of report you will put together, because this is going to be more of evidence. So you need a copy of your updated CV, you need a copy of your PDP, your SWOT, your skills audit, and your learning style. That will constitute 80% of your assignment. And the only 3 tasks that you have to basically write, rather 2 tasks that you have to basically write, will be 3.1 and 3.2. The 3.3 is basically explaining how your skills are adapted and why do you think you have these skills to work within this sector, is what you have to explain in a bit of a reflective statement. Is that okay? No worries. Now, in terms of just very briefly looking at scheduling